The National Weather Service.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you from the Alaska National Weather Service. It's the 18th of February. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date on your local weather information, especially in the Kobuk and Noatak valleys tonight. If you can access the web, go to weather.gov/Alaska. Find one of the mobile versions there and get that really quickly and save it on your phone. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. You can find us on Facebook during the day. And for those of you in southwestern Alaska, it's really important that you're staying up to date on the weather information there, as it is warmer than normal. And that's changing the river ice conditions there, and you need to be prepared for perhaps dangerous conditions if you're trying to travel the Kuskokwim or the lower Yukon rivers there in the coming days. So information is posted on Facebook there tonight. On Twitter, you can find information all day long from NWS Anchorage, NWS Juneau, and NWS Fairbanks. Using the hashtag AKwx, it's a way to find more information about the weather community around all of Alaska. So whether it's a picture or a storm report or something you'd like to share with anyone, just type in AKwx after your tweet, and that way we're watching that all the time, and we'll see that pop up as well, even if you're not directly talking to the National Weather Service. Very helpful there. And for YouTube, you can always find your afternoon map briefings around 4 o'clock or so from the Alaska Weather TV Desk team. You'll get those every day on YouTube, and you can find the complete show that you're watching right now, of course, by searching youtube.com and just type in AKwx TV for the whole show later on in the evening. The hazardous weather outlook shows that areas in the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys are still under a winter storm warning at this point. Snow's been falling there pretty much all day, and maybe even started late last night. We're expecting about another 2 inches of snow, generally from Ambler to Shugnak southward, and that's going to probably include some freezing rain as well. North of that, it's going to be about 3 to 5 inches of additional accumulation. The winter storm warning itself will go until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. And the yellow shaded areas here are winter weather advisories, and most of those areas are likely going to see a little more freezing rain, perhaps another tenth or so. Some of these advisories will gradually expire tonight and into tomorrow. So probably the best chance for accumulating snow will be for areas north of Ambler and Shugnak as we head into the nighttime hours and early morning hours of tomorrow. Elsewhere, there's still chances for snow and probably some light freezing rain, but amounts should not be as heavy as what we were talking about late yesterday. Here's a look at the Bering Sea satellite picture now, and you'll notice this next wave of low pressure coming out of the North Pacific is starting to move northward already. With that comes another surge of warmer air, and this is what we're talking about for southwestern Alaska. As this warmer air is moving over some of the lower delta regions, that could start to erode some of the ice and at least weaken it in some ways, that it could make travel a little more dangerous than it has been already this winter. So prepare for some changing conditions there on the lower ice across southwestern Alaska. Looking northward, you can see the current low pressure system working over the Seward Peninsula and up into the Noatak and Kobuk valleys. This will continue moving northward, and it will probably bring some snow to the Arctic coast. So as we go ahead into the next several days, you're going to look at some light accumulations here across the Arctic coast, with low pressure gradually moving its way up into the Beaufort Sea as we go ahead in time. Low pressure still working across southeastern Alaska. The current wave there is working itself into British Columbia and Yukon. With that, we'll continue to see some light accumulations of snow across the Copper River Basin through this evening and into early tomorrow. For now, though, high pressure is taking charge of the interior and south central Alaska. That made for a great opportunity to see the northern lights last night and the last several nights, apparently. And it should keep the sky fairly clear across the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island in the coming days before the next round of warmer air works up northward. And again, this is the system we just saw in the other satellite view that's working itself toward the southern Bering Sea, Bristol Bay, and southwestern Alaska. Here's our current weather map. Low pressure sitting just offshore of coastal southeast, sitting at 1,002 millibars. Not a very strong system, but it's enough to slosh more rain into the interior of southeast. High pressure sitting just to the south of Fairbanks and northeast of Gulf Cannon there at 1,013 millibars. Another wave of low pressure sitting just north of Kaktovik, and a frontal boundary draped across the Seward Peninsula. This is the system we're seeing on satellite that's making the spin here across Seward Peninsula and sloshing the snow up into the Noatak and Kobuk valleys. South, this is the leading edge of the warmer air we were watching on satellite there. Light rainfall expected to continue across central and eastern parts of the Aleutians, and warmer air will continue working northward as well. As we head through tonight, watch for spotty areas of rain and snow showers across the eastern chain, the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula, all the way west toward Adak and Atka. Light rain is possible across southeastern Alaska, westward to about Prince William Sound. Northward is where we should expect to see some light snowfall accumulations for the Copper River Basin. But to the west of that, a ridge of high pressure will continue to knock away some of the clouds. So slightly cooler weather should be expected in many locations that have still been a little mild from previous days. Out across the west, winter storm warnings will continue for the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys until about 6 o'clock in the morning again. And areas northward into the slopes of the Brooks Range will likely see a better chance for accumulating snow. Some of that as high as 3 to 5 inches again. Colder air is massing just to the west of this boundary. It's not going to move a whole lot in the next couple of days. In fact, it might shift around a little bit west and east. It just doesn't have a big push just yet to start moving east into the interior or the Brooks Range or even the Arctic coast. As we go into Thursday, you can see the frontal boundary there starting to show a little more motion. Light snow will continue across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range there, but high pressure gets a little bit more control over more parts of the interior, north of the Yukon, south of the Yukon, and all the way west of the Alaska Range. So look for a clearer, drier sky across some parts of the western range and even the passes. For southeast, high pressure is moving northward just a little bit. That should keep winds a little bit lighter across many parts of coastal and interior southeast. But out to the west, that's also helping to move that warmer air northward into Bristol Bay and across the southern parts of the Bering. The warmer air moving up toward Nunivak Island may present some periods of rain and snow showers there, same for coastal sections of southwest. And then as you get into the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta regions, there may be some leading snow showers on the northern end of that. But south of that, the air is warm enough for rain across the southern parts of the Alaska Peninsula and way west out across Adak and Atka, with several other waves of low pressure trailing behind that to the west. As we get into Friday, you can see how that kind of swirls back around into the north and northeast. A 982 millibar low is what we're talking about now, just east of Sand Point and southwest of Castle Cape. That's going to present us with more of a south and easterly flow coming up over the Cook Inlet, Barren Islands, and into southwestern Alaska. And that, along with the temperatures it brings, could start to make the river ice conditions a little more dangerous. So once again, if you plan on traveling the Kuskokwim or the lower Yukon or any of the other regional rivers as we head into Friday and Saturday, make sure that you know what the river conditions are before you head out, because things could be changing with the amount of warmth that seems to be spreading northward. Snow showers are possible across the Norton Sound region and into Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound as we head into Friday. And notice that our frontal boundary across the north has fallen apart, and that should take the focus for any snow showers, maybe even some stronger winds away from the Beaufort Seacoast heading into the weekend. In the meantime, high pressure sitting across the central and southern sections of Yukon. With that should help to clear the sky up a little bit more for parts of southeast and slow the winds down a little bit there. But that still presents us with a decent conveyor belt of warmer and wetter air from the Pacific heading into south central Alaska as we head into the weekend, setting the stage for perhaps a little more wind and certainly some more spring-like precipitation, let's say, as we head into Saturday and Sunday. So keep your eyes on that. Temperature-wise across southeast, some places made it up to about 50 degrees today around Craig and southward. You can see temperatures were in the mid-40s there, as well as Ketchikan and Annette. Looked like Wrangell was fairly mild. 39 around Hyder today. Around Juneau, Haines, and Skagway, temperatures hovering close to 40 degrees, 45 in Sitka. Prince William Sound saw temperatures mainly in the 30s and 40s. Valdez was a cooler 36. Homer and Seward in the lower 40s there. 35 in Kenai. Same goes for Anchorage today, up around Talkeetna and Skwentna. Fairly mild day with readings well above freezing. 22 in Fairbanks for Northway and Eagle. We saw daytime highs in the lower to mid-20s. 22 in Fairbanks, 12 in Fort Yukon, about the same there in Old Crow, 3 degrees in Arctic Village, and just up the road in Anaktuvuk Pass, it was a much warmer 30 degrees. Now the Arctic coast saw temps in the low to mid-teens today from Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse out toward Kaktovik. Barrow was 0. Same goes for Atkasuk, and temperatures around The 20s and 30s for Kotzebue Sound, 27 in Nome again with snow in the region, 26 in Unalakleet. For McGrath, it was 38. Grayling showed 32. Bethel, 33 degrees. And for Southwest around Bristol Bay, upper 30s to lower 40s around King Salmon. Same goes for Kodiak Island. In fact, Kodiak was in the mid-40s today. 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula, Cold Bay, False Pass, Sandpoint, all fairly mild. 40 in Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. St. Paul reported 33. And mid to upper 30s for the central and western part of the chain, with St. Lawrence Island only at 10. Now, overnight low temperatures will stay in the single digits for the Tanana Valley and eastward. Northward around Arctic Village, 8 degrees is expected, with 5 for Barrow, which is fairly mild, 14 in Nome. Southwest in the teens and 20s, 33 in Kodiak, 30s for most of the peninsula and the chain. Southeast expected to stay in the mid to upper 30s, maybe even 40 degrees when you get southward toward Craig and Klawock. And South Central will be in the teens and 20s. Most of the 20s will be on the coastal locations, of course. High temperatures tomorrow will still be fairly mild, with readings for most of South Central at or just above freezing, 41 in Kodiak. For Southeast, mid to upper 40s for most areas, Juneau closer to 42. The Middle Tanana Valley and Fairbanks from Tanana to Ambler and westward, even in the mid to upper 20s there. So a lot of that warmth is still spreading northward. Look for coastal areas of Southwest to stay at or above freezing tomorrow. Nome's expecting 19, 12 in Barrow. And for Southwest, including the Bristol Bay region, the Alaska Peninsula, and the chain, expect those high temperatures from 40 to about 45 degrees. Kodiak again around 41. On to flying weather now, and you can see the effects of high pressure across south central Alaska and the western Alaska range. If you're looking to get through a rainy pass, perhaps windy pass, maybe Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, tomorrow could be your day as far as visibility goes. Now, for points eastward, including Matasta Pass, we'll probably see a little more visibility issues there. For southeast, I'm still expecting MVFR to be fairly widespread. And for some of our northern passes, it'll be hit and miss IFR. The Chukchi Seacoast looking to be IFR, especially for most of Kotzebue Sound. And then areas of the Pribilofs and eastward, we're expecting MVFR to IFR conditions. And on the windward side of the Alaska Peninsula and out toward the south-facing Pacific coastline of around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor and Akutan, expect some IFR there. Here's a look at those pass conditions then in detail. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass right now, we're going to say IFR through most of the day. There might be some transitional periods over toward MVFR. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, as you saw there, look pretty good. VFR conditions there toward Rainy Pass and for Windy Pass. So if you need to go, tomorrow could be the day. Isabel Pass, VFR to MVFR conditions are expected there. Matasta Pass will likely lean over toward IFR as the day goes on. Sonita Pass, we're going to say it's going to be okay. VFR conditions expected for most of your Thursday. Portage Pass at this point looks pretty good. Probably some morning fog, and then that should burn off. Chilkoot and White Pass expecting MVFR through most of your Thursday at this point. For freezing levels, you'll see the warm air is kind of stretching out toward the west and moving northward slowly. The surface freezing line has dropped southward, but the warm air aloft is moving northward. And again, that presents us with an interesting precipitation forecast heading into the next several days after that frontal boundary lifts northward. There could be some mixed precipitation again across southwest. The places that have seen it recently may do so again. As we look at the icing potential, mainly above 6,000 feet is what you're expecting if you're crossing over the Canadian border there. Most of that will be on the eastern side of the international border. North of the Beaufort Seacoast and Chukchi Seacoast, generally above 2,000 feet is where we should run into some light to isolated moderate north and west of Barrow and Wainwright. And our main focus for icing potential tomorrow will be in the vicinity of the frontal boundary that's moving northward, generally above 4,000 feet. There's still plenty of warm air there, so you'll have to get up above that to find the moisture and the right temperatures there for a better risk of icing. Some of that could reach occasional moderate at times, generally east of the Pribilofs and southeast into places like Sandpoint, Cold Bay, and False Pass. Here's the jet stream, and high pressure still in charge of the west coast and most of the eastern Pacific. As such, it's pushing northward into Alaska a little bit more and driving that stronger southerly flow into the south and eastern parts of the Bering Sea. That's what's bringing the unusual warmth into the west coast. The cold air that's been traveling into the lower 48 brought to us courtesy of this dip in the jet stream moving out of eastern Alaska and into western Canada. Those speeds around 50, 60, even 85 knots at times. And a much stronger southerly flow on the south side there is attached to the Pacific jet stream now at 150 to 160 knots. At 9,000 feet, the southeasterly flow crossing over the Gulf is pushing moisture into south central and southwestern Alaska. Right now, high pressure at the surface is kind of keeping the sky clear, but conditions remain a little bit on the mild side. Low pressure across the North Pacific is speeding the winds up across the Alaska Peninsula around 40 to 50 knots, and a southwesterly flow crossing the Bering Strait at 30 to 35 knots is seen there all the way up through the Arctic coast. High pressure is in charge of southeast. Wind speeds there are fairly light across the inner waterways, and they pick up fairly quickly as you move offshore. There's a weak wave of low pressure just south of Yakutat right now. Those wind speeds are running around 5 to as high as 20 knots, but most of the area is controlled by high pressure, and you can see that south and easterly shift a little bit pushed a little bit further westward in this case, 20 to 35 knots, and because of the convergence that we're seeing across the Alaska Peninsula, those wind speeds ramp up to as high as 50 knots in some cases. We still have our southwesterly flow crossing the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, and we have low pressure that's sitting across the southern Bering with wind speeds crossing the Pribilovs and the western chain between 40 and even 50 knots at times. So probably find some chop out there. As far as turbulence goes, those will be our hot spots below 6,000 feet for Bristol Bay and across the central and western chain, all again in the vicinity of the front. And we'll find some isolated turbulence there, mainly across the western Brooks Range and Norton Sound, most of that running below 4,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll have a sea ice update for you as well as your marine forecast here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
We have a big solar flare coming in, so we're out here on an aurora hunt. It's a CME, it's dynamite, coronal mass ejection. It's when the sun, it kicks off energy and these explosions that are larger than the Earth, explosion type things coming off of sunspots. And if that energy is pointing straight at the Earth, it gets caught up in our magnetic field, and that energy, electrons, come down our magnetic field, collide with oxygen up there about 50 or a couple hundred miles high, and that's what generates the northern lights. My job as the photographer and the aurora hunter is to be in position, you know, location, location, location. And I like to think I'm composing. Mother Nature, it's a bit of a teamwork thing, you know, she's got to put on the show, but I have to be in the right position and of course with the right tools and the know-how. I've stopped keeping track of how much time I spend out here in terms of hours. It's more in terms of weeks or months, or at this point years now. You know, it was always in me. Even when I was a kid growing up in the lower 48, I would spend nights sleeping on our trampoline, just staring at the stars. I'm in 4th grade and I'm going, wow, look at those stars. And I'd see how many nights in a row I could sleep on the trampoline. And I think my record was 23 nights in a row. So I was doing kind of strange things for an Iowa country boy. I can remember specifically the very first time I saw the northern lights. It was 1989, the peak of the solar cycle, and I was going to graduate school in Laramie, Wyoming. And all of a sudden we had heard the northern lights were out. It's like, what are those? I'd never really seen them before. And my goodness gracious, we were on top of a mountain in the Laramie Range and they were turning blood red. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And the very first picture I took, that was 1990. Now, an old film camera, Pentax K1000 on a plastic Kmart tripod. Took 2 shots on slide film and got them back. And I thought, oh my gosh, this beautiful green thing swirling about. And from that moment, I was hooked. When I realized that you could preserve the auroras on film, I just experimented a ton. I'd had a heaping stack of slides, the no good ones. The experiments gone wrong, you know, too dark, fuzzy, out of focus, too light. I had this huge garbage can full of excess slide film, and that was just the learning curve. Well, when I go out here, it's all about getting the shot. And my wife and I, we've called it the hero shot. But the hero shot is the one where you just come home and you go, look at this. And everyone goes, wow, and you feel like a hero. It's a wonderful feeling. You know, it's good for the ego, of course. It's good for the business, but if you kind of strip that away, it's good for what's inside you, because that's really the hero moment in nature. And Mother Nature's putting on this show that is just mind-blowing. It's unbelievable. When I first resigned from my day job, that was in 1996, and decided I wanted to become a full-time aurora hunter, my goal from that moment and to this day still is to get one hero shot a year. I figured, and I'm talking the kind that somebody wants to buy from you and hang on their wall, where the auroras are extremely bright, very active, turning colors, where you can't believe your eyes. If you get to preserve a little sample of that with a photograph, well, it's what we call the hero shot. Wow, what a feeling. I mean, oh, you're elevated, levitating, you're lifted up, your spirits are so high that I love that feeling. And I think I get that so much from seeing cool things in nature that I will go way out of my way to find that. And I can, you know, the next day, well, I'll be just laying there thinking about it and thinking how lucky I was, or how fortunate. Of course, I just, you know, spent 2 weeks sitting there staring at the sky and not seeing anything, so you got to remember that, you know, luck is kind of a relative term, but I still just feel incredibly lucky to be even in a position to where I could have been there, taken a photograph of it, and just mainly experienced it. Well, that feeling could last for days.
And good luck chasing the light wherever those chases take you there. Here's a look at the sea ice edge, and you'll notice it's still just to the north of St. Paul, but running around 20 to 25 nautical miles to the north there. The ice edge continues to sit very close to Bristol Bay. There is some open water in here, but it's kind of hit and miss. Otherwise, not a whole lot of changes there. The ice is still south of Callaghan Island and Cook Inlet as well. For the very latest sea ice edge analysis and forecast, you can always go to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. Here's the marine forecast now for southeast. Winds will remain light across the inner coast, 10 to about 20 knots there. Strongest in Clarence Strait, of course, around 4-foot seas are expected there. West and southwest winds from Clarence Strait, from Dixon Entrance northward toward Sitka, and then a light wind coming out of Cross Sound from the east, about 15 knots with an 8-foot sea. Westerlies coming into Yakutat, though. Look for more of a uniform flow up the outer coast from 15 knots in the south to as high as 30 knots in the north, with 6-foot seas there outside of Yakutat. Northerlies coming out of the Lynn Canal and around Frederick Sound and Stevens Passage, still running around 10 knots, and the winds in Clarence Strait diminished to 10 knots with a 2-foot sea. Across south central, north and northeast winds coming down Cook Inlet, west of the Barrens, and speeding up a little bit more into Shelikof Strait to 25 knots with 4 to 7-foot seas there. Otherwise, we're looking at offshore winds from Resurrection Bay and inside of Prince William Sound, about 10 to 20 knots. Westerlies just outside of Prince William Sound at 15 knots with a 6-foot sea, and southeasterlies are coming into Kodiak Island at 25 knots with a 9-foot sea. Those pick up to 35 knots as we head into Friday, with a much stronger easterly wind and a higher gale coming into the areas east of the Barrens and continuing to the west with a 19-foot sea. North and northeast winds coming down Cook Inlet to Callaghan Island at 30 knots with an 8-foot sea. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound with a 4-foot sea. And as we get into the Alaska Peninsula, notice those east winds also continue across the peninsula from 30 to 35 knots on Thursday. Slightly stronger and more steady winds at 35 knots from Castle Cape all the way out toward King Cove and Falls Pass with 15-foot seas in the Pacific. Those will diminish a little bit there south of Sand Point and King Cove for Friday. 35 knots continue, though, from Castle Cape to Chignik with a 14-foot sea. Easterlies inside of Bristol Bay and the ice-free waters, seas could be as high as 5 feet. And 5-foot seas are expected down the coast as well, with slightly lower winds at 25 knots from the east. Across the Aleutians, an east and north wind is continuing across the Bering Sea coast from 30 to 35 knots. Slightly stronger winds make it over Atka and Adak at 40 knots with a 13-foot sea. North and westerly winds from Kiska to Attu at 20 to 35 knots. And as we get into Friday, notice that the winds shift just a little bit. They're still east and northerly or so across the Bering Sea coast, 15 to 25 knots. Otherwise, a north and east wind on the Pacific side, 9 to 10-foot seas there, and a light and somewhat variable wind out across Attu with a 6-foot sea there. Northerlies still going around Kiska with a 10-foot sea for Friday. Down the west coast, southerlies making their way over St. Lawrence Island with an offshore wind from Hooper Bay southward into the Kuskokwim. 35-knot winds there with an 8-foot sea in the ice-free waters. And as you look out to the south and west, you should expect to see light winds around the Pribilofs there, as high as 30 knots though during the day with a 10-foot sea. Northeasterlies around St. Matthew with a 3-foot sea by Friday. Look for a northeasterly wind around St. Lawrence Island. Easterly offshore winds around the Kuskokwim Bay, 30 knots with a 6-foot sea, and winds should be a little bit lower there around St. Paul and St. George for Friday with a 9-foot sea. Southerlies making it across the Beaufort Seacoast for Thursday, 15 to 20 knots are expected. Onshore northwesterlies from 15 to 20 knots down the Chukchi Seacoast by Friday. Look for northerlies coming into Kotzebue Sound around 20 knots. And westerlies coming across the Beaufort Seacoast as high as 20 knots and as low as 10 knots north of Kaktovik. Let's recap tonight's weather. Look for winter storm warnings to continue until 6 o'clock tomorrow morning for the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys there, where from Ambler to Shugnak north you should see as high as 3 to 5 inches of additional snowfall. South of that you'll see about 1 to 2 inches. Expect some areas in those regions to also see some freezing rain. Most of that should be light and only about 1/10 of an inch or less. As you head down the Yukon Valley toward Grayling, expect some freezing rain to be an issue there. Most of that, again, also light, around 1/10 of an inch or less, but watch for some surfaces and the boardwalks to be slick. A frontal boundary to the south of the Alaska Peninsula is lifting northward as we head into Thursday. That's going to send another surge of warmer air into southwestern Alaska. As it does that, that could start to change the river ice conditions there for the Kuskokwim and the Yukon especially, but for any river or stream in the region, be extra careful as the ice conditions may be changing with the warmer air moving northward. That low stays just to your south as we head into Friday and Saturday. More warm airs coming to South Central. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.